Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're unpacking a stack of sources that draw this really striking parallel, maybe unexpected.
Definitely unexpected. It connects, believe it or not, 19th century Russian political economy with, well, really current debates around neurodiversity.
It's quite the intellectual leap, isn't it? Need some context.
It absolutely does. So the core idea in these sources is this. They're arguing that autism, if you view it not just as a diagnosis, but as a sort of collective way of being, is like a commons under siege.
A commons under siege, okay.
And the pressures it faces today, the push for cures or intense normalization, they argue this follows historical patterns of resistance and, frankly, erasure that we've seen before when one system tries to stamp out another way of life that doesn't quite fit.
Okay, so let's try and unpack that connection. Our mission here is to really understand this critique of systems that seem designed to, well, eliminate difference.
Exactly. We'll use that historical lens, Marx, and the Russian peasant commune, the Obshchina, and then pivot to look at a modern example the authors call the theater of Tylenol.
Right. So from agrarian politics to a global health spectacle, it's quite a journey we're taking you on. So let's start back in 1881. Karl Marx, near the end of his life, and he's in correspondence with this key Russian revolutionary figure, Vera Zasulich.
Right, and she's basically throwing a wrench into Marx's big theories about capitalism's inevitable path.
How so? What was her core question?
Well, Zasulich was asking something fundamental for Russia's future. She was saying, look, do we have to follow that Western European route, total land privatization, kicking peasants off the land, brutal industrialization?
Or was there another option?
Exactly. Or, she wondered, could the Obshchina, the centuries-old rural commune system they already had, could that actually be preserved? Could it maybe even bypass capitalism and become a direct starting point for socialism?
Okay, so we need to understand this, Obshchina. The sources describe it as more than just a village, right?
Oh, much more. It was a whole system. Land wasn't just owned communally. Crucially, it was periodically redistributed.
Redistributed based on right.
Based on the needs of the families, their size, their ability to work the land, not based on fixed private ownership titles. It was dynamic.
Which is completely different from the logic of private property taking hold then.
Fundamentally different. It was a living, breathing counterweight to it. Its whole value system wasn't capitalist. Decisions were collective, resources were managed for the community, need was prioritized over individual profit.
You can see how that would clash with the czarist state and, early capitalist interests.
Absolutely, on a collision course. And what's fascinating, the sources point out, is watching Marx grapple with this in his drafts, responding to Zasulich.
He didn't have an immediate answer.
Well, he initially treated it like a theoretical puzzle. Could this commune survive capitalism? Could it adapt? But the more he learned about the realities Zasulich was describing,
What changed?
he realized it wasn't some neutral thought experiment anymore. The commune was already under attack. Landlords, the state, capitalist pressures, they were actively trying to dismantle it.
So the question shifted.
It shifted entirely. It stopped being about, could it work, and became, how can it defend itself?
Yeah.
It was already framed by its opponents, as the authors put it, as an enemy to be beaten. Its very existence was a kind of refusal of this new economic order.
That idea, a way of life being targeted for destruction because it doesn't conform, that's the bridge, isn't it?
That's the core parallel the sources want us to see.
Okay, let's take that leap now. From agrarian communes to cognitive difference. So fast forward to today. The sources use this very striking phrase, the theater of Tylenol. What exactly are they referring to here?
They're talking about a specific kind of public performance, really. A mix of media spectacle and legal maneuvering. So picture this. A big press conference, lots of media attention. Officials, lobbyists, lawyers suggesting that a Tylenol paracetamol, the pain reliever millions of pregnant women have taken safely for decades, was somehow the hidden cause of autism.
Wow, that's a huge claim.
A huge claim presented with this air of discovery of finding the culprit. The sources argue it was essentially a charade.
The charade designed to do what?
Designed, they argue, to put autism itself on trial, to frame it not as natural human variation, but as a recent tragedy, a kind of chemical mistake, a preventable error.
And the sources are critiquing the performance of this, not necessarily debating the underlying science.
Well, they dismiss the science as lacking, but yes, the main focus is the rhetorical strategy. They see it as a deliberate attempt to recast autistic ways of being as pathology, something to be eliminated, maybe through lawsuits, maybe eventually through cures.
Now, the sources make a comparison here that might raise some eyebrows. They liken the Tylenol claim to,
Yeah.
well, to Alex Jones's infamous turning the frogs gay rant.
Yeah, they do. And they anticipate that this comparison might seem, extreme or dismissive.
It does feel like it risks trivializing the concerns, maybe. Linking a, let's say, flawed scientific argument to an outright conspiracy theory.
That's a fair question, but the sources argue the comparison is necessary to highlight the underlying mechanism. They're saying the specific contaminant, whether it's Tylenol or chemicals in the water, is almost irrelevant.
The mechanism being?
The mechanism of blaming difference on some external corruption or toxin, whether it's autism or queerness or something else, the pattern is the same. Cast the non-conforming identity as an unnatural consequence of a mistake.
Ah, I see. So the message becomes, this difference shouldn't exist. It's an error we need to fix.
Exactly. It reinforces that core idea that autism is fundamentally a problem to be solved, a defect, rather than just a different way of being human that needs accommodation and understanding.
Okay, so let's make that parallel explicit now. We saw how the Obshchina was targeted because its communal non-capitalist logic didn't fit. How do the sources argue autistic life functions like a modern Obshchina?
Well, think about why the Obshchina was seen as backward or inefficient, right? It prioritized collective well-being over individual rapid accumulation.
Wasn't maximizing profit in the capitalist sense.
Precisely. And the sources argue artistic life intrinsically resists today's reigning market logics in a similar way. Our lives, they suggest, are often, well, they're not always linear. They can be recursive, rhythmic.
Can you give an example of that resistance?
Think about the demands of the modern economy. Speed, constant output, predictable performance, easy quantification.
By everything measured.
Everything measured. Now consider autistic experiences. Intense sensory attunements that might require quiet or withdrawal, unique ways of communicating, maybe periods of silence, deep focus on specific interests that don't align with market demands.
Those don't fit the mold of the ideal worker.
Not at all. They often violate that standard of instant, measurable efficiency. And that resistance, that nonconformity, is immediately marked. It gets labeled as defective, deficient, unproductive.
But the sources argue that within that apparent inefficiency, there's a different kind of value system, a communal life.
Exactly. They talk about the fabric of the commons in autistic kinship. It's not about shared land anymore, but shared ways of relating and supporting each other.
What does that look like in practice?
It could be things like parallel play, being together, engaged in separate things, but finding comfort and solidarity in that shared space without demanding constant interaction.
Okay.
Or, the deep connection forged through a shared special interest, using a shared script almost. Or even just the quiet, wordless comfort of stimming alongside someone who understands.
These are forms of mutual support that aren't easily measured or transactional.
Not at all. They build trust, share knowledge, sustain well-being completely outside the logic of the market. That's the modern commons, the sources argue, built on shared relational and sensory ways of being.
And just like the Obshchina was reframed by the Tsar state as a burden, a drag on progress.
This autistic commons is constantly framed in terms of cost.
The cost argument.
Right. The violence becomes administrative. The state, the systems, they define autistic existence through budget lines, insurance codes, diagnostic thresholds. It's measured as a strain, a deficit, a high cost for support.
So the difference itself gets reinterpreted as waste.
Waste to be streamlined, fixed through therapy, maybe contained, certainly minimized. The message is clear. If it doesn't conform to market logic, it needs to be excised or managed out of sight.
This leads directly to what felt like one of the most powerful parts of the sources, this digression, tackling that inevitable question.
The what about the cost question always comes up.
Yeah. What about people with really high support needs, very expensive needs? Society has limits, right?
And the sources, rather than just answering defensively, they deploy what they call mirrors. They turn the question right back around.
How do they do that?
They ask, why? Why is the word expensive suddenly thrown down like a final judgment only when we talk about a disabled child needing a communication device, or someone needing 24/7 support, or safe, accessible housing?
Why are those the moments that cost alarm bells ring loudest?
Exactly. Why are these specific costs the costs of care, of dignity, of enabling communication, of ensuring basic safety? Why are these the costs that are always framed as potentially unsustainable burdens?
The comparisons they draw are stark. They contrast this scrutiny over, say, funding an AC device.
With the almost unquestioned acceptance of vastly larger sums spent elsewhere.
Like military spending.
Absolutely. They point directly at it. Look at the stock prices of defense contractors like Raytheon or Northrop Grumman, fueled by perpetual conflict. That's never too expensive.
Or other systemic costs.
Yeah. They give the example of, say, a major city like Los Angeles routinely paying out hundreds of millions in settlements for police misconduct lawsuits year after year. That money is found. It's treated as a necessary cost of doing business, of maintaining the current system.
Those expenditures aren't typically framed as irresponsible burdens on the taxpayer in the same way.
Not at all. They're seen as inherent, almost unavoidable costs.
So the critique isn't really about scarcity, is it? It's about priorities.
That is precisely the point the sources hammer home. The real question isn't, is autistic life inherently too expensive? The real question is, why is the system set up so that the right to profit from war or resource extraction or policing is treated as sacred and untouchable?
While the right to basic care, food, housing, communication for disabled people is always up for debate, always negotiable, always framed as a potential burden.
The difference in how we value these things is just staggering, and it reveals everything about which forms of life and which forms of profit the system is fundamentally designed to protect.
Okay, let's bring it back to that historical exchange between Marx and Zasulich.
Yeah.
What was the key strategic takeaway from that, according to the sources?
The big takeaway was realizing the nature of the conflict. It wasn't just an intellectual puzzle about the Obshchina's future. It was a struggle for survival, a battlefield.
And the crucial move was?
Refusing to answer the questions on the terms set by those trying to destroy the commune. Don't get drawn into arguing about whether you're efficient enough by their standards.
So how does that translate into modern action? Or praxis, as the sources put it?
Well, the answer to what should we do isn't about chasing after supposed cures like the ones hyped in the theater of Tylenol. It's not about accepting ever narrower diagnostic criteria designed to shrink the category.
It's about
defending and expanding the Obshchina. Defending autistic ways of being, insisting on these ways of living, caring for each other, communicating, existing.
And the method of resistance isn't necessarily marching in the streets, but using those mirrors and scaffolds we talked about, using questions as a form of counterpower.
Exactly. Asking those uncomfortable questions becomes a political act. Why is the budget for war treated as essential, but the budget for accessible housing seen as a luxury?
And who gets to speak is also critical here, isn't it?
Hugely critical. The sources argue that regimes, systems of power, they actually prefer a kind of ventriloquism.
Ventriloquism?
Yeah, they prefer large organizations, often non-autistic-led, that claim to speak for autistic people. Organizations that translate autistic lives into easily digestible sound bites, usually focused on deficits, and seek solutions within the existing system's logic.
Making it palatable, perhaps.
Making it palatable, making it manageable, keeping it contained within the dominant framework.
There is true resistance, according to this view,
is refusing that translation. It's autistic people speaking in their own voices, in their own words, with their own cadence, through their own networks and channels. It's the refusal to disappear, the refusal to accept being framed solely in the negative.
It's like the Obshchina. Surviving, not by becoming a better capitalist enterprise, but just by continuing to be the Obshchina.
Precisely. That stubborn, persistent refusal to simply vanish on the terms dictated by the dominant system, that's the core of the resistance. Hashtag outro.
This analysis really offers such a sharp lens on power, value, and how different ways of life are treated. It suggests this pattern attacking communal, non-conforming ways of being, from the Russian commune to autistic kinship today. It's cyclical, it's strategic.
Yeah, and the sources imply that the biggest threat to the dominant system isn't necessarily loud opposition. It's the quiet, tenacious persistence of the Obshchina. The simple existence of a self-sustaining way of life that the system can't easily measure, control, or profit from.
It just is.
It just is. And that persistence leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to really chew on, especially regarding resources and what we deem valuable.
Go on.
If the cost of supporting disabled people to live with basic dignity, tailored housing, proper care, tools to communicate, if that's constantly debated as being too expensive, a potential drain on society. What does that constant debate tell us about a society that simultaneously treats spending endless billions on weapon systems, on drones, on things designed for profit through destruction as absolutely necessary, as sacred almost?
It forces you to confront the choices.
It really does. So the question to consider is, which costs do we as a society accept as just, inevitable, as the price of maintaining things as they are? And why those specific costs and not others?
A really profound challenge to how we assign value. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive exploring how different forms of communal life get measured and often mismeasured. We'll see you next time.